Hello and welcome back to Saints of the Week here at the Things That Don't Change for the 14th Sunday and 14th week in Ordinary Time. And we only got two Saints today and little scant on the information for both of them, so this is probably a bit of a quicker episode. For those of you who missed last week's episode, that I didn't post it in the locals as usual. That's because last week's Saints of the Week, which we had quite a few, we actually posted as a full episode. So go to our Spotify, our YouTube channel, also Apple Podcasts if you want to check that out. Really great episode, really awesome saints, St. Peter, St. Paul, St. Thomas the Apostle, St. Junipero Serra, and others. So if you're interested in those, of course, go back and check that out. But this week, as I mentioned, we have two saints, bit of a smaller spread here today. And the first saint that we have is St. Augustine Zhao Rong. Now, Zhao Rong was a Chinese man. He was born in the year 1746 in Guizhou, which is kind of in southern China. And, not raised with any sort of Christian faith or any Western faith at all, raised as kind of a standard Chinese man in the Confucian traditions of China around this time. At the age of 20, he joined the army of the Qing dynasty, which was the current ruling dynasty of China. And during his time in the army, a wave of anti-Christian persecutions kind of rose up kind of all over the country. And it was during this time that Zhao Rong was actually put in charge of guarding, different prisoners at this one specific prison. And of course, many of these prisoners were Christians who had been rounded up during this persecution. One in particular was a French missionary priest by the name of Father Gabriel Tarin Dufresne. And Father Gabriel, while he was in prison, ended up kind of catechizing Zhao Rong and kind of, teaching him some of the introductory materials of the faith. And it was, kind of through the intercession of this priest that Zhao Rong decided that he wanted to be baptized. He realized that the truth of the Christian faith and wanted to kind of become a Christian himself. So Zhao Rong was baptized, after which he took the name Augustine as his baptismal name. And he after this he really felt a call to become a priest. So 5 years after this, he became an ordained priest in his own right, and then spent many years just stationed in Yunnan province in southern China, just working to make other converts of some of the other Chinese that he knew, just ministering to the poor, to the sick, to his community. In the beginning of the 19th century, so around the around the year 1800. A new wave of anti-Christian persecutions kind of erupted in China. We talked about this a couple of months ago, actually, in our first episode of Saints of the Week, when we talked about Saint Joseph Zhang de Peng. This is just a period where there was a lot of suspicion of Westerners, suspicion of outsiders, and of course Christians, going around trying to convert the people were kind of at the head of this. Augustine was arrested during this time and put in prison. He was tortured many times to recant his faith, which of course he completely refused to do. And then eventually he ended up dying in prison in the year 1815. Pope Leo XIII beatified him in 1893. And then he was canonized by Pope St. John Paul II in the year 2000, along with the other martyrs of China, commonly known under the title St. Augustine, Zhao Rong, and Companions. This, of course, also included St. Joseph de Peng, who we talked about a couple of weeks ago. And he's also considered the first Chinese priest, native-born Chinese priest to be martyred for the faith. So that is St. Augustine Zhao Rong, and his feast day is on July the 9th. Now, the second saint that we have today, a little more well-known, that being St. Benedict of Nursia. So St. Benedict was born around the year 480 in Nursia, which is in Italy. And he was actually born, he had a twin sister, Scholastica, who, we also know as Saint Scholastica. Two very holy, twin brother and sister, coming from the same family, of course. So Saint Benedict was educated in Rome, and, he's kind of training to be like a public speaker, learning rhetoric, that sort of thing. And the school that he attended was kind of very affluent, and then a lot of his fellow students and companions were kind of taken with kind of like with that affluence, with a very hedonistic and vice-filled lifestyle, a lot of excesses, and Benedict was very he's very against that, he saw that that was a very unhelpful way to live. And he felt the need to get away from it to kind of devote himself to more prayer and kind of more austere lifestyle. So sometime while he was at this school, people posit sometime between age 14 and 19, he made the decision to give up his entire inheritance and to leave Rome. And instead, he went to a small village where he could try to, find God in peace and solitude. During the time in this village, he kind of realized that even that village was a little too noisy for him. There's a little too much going on. So he left there and retreated to a small cave where he stayed for 3 years. And after these 3 years of solitude, he'd started to kind of gain a bit of a following, people interested kind of in his way of life. That he kind of fell in with a group of monks, who were interested. Their abbot had just died, and they wanted him to kind of come, become their new abbot because they're really enamored kind of with his style. However, while he was, with these monks, it quickly became evident that him and the monks did not get along very well. They just didn't quite vibe with his methods. He was a little too rigorous for them. And it's said, the story goes that they actually tried to poison him to get rid of him. However, after they had filled like a cup with, a poison drink, he prayed, he kind of blessed over the cup, and then the cup shattered, kind of in a miraculous way. And they ended up just kind of, banishing him from the monastery. He left, and kind of went his own way once again. There's also another story that, at some time later, another priest named Florentius, who wasn't really a fan of his, also tried to poison him, this time using poisoned bread. However, again, in the same kind of manner, Benedict prayed over the bread, and then the raven kind of swooped down and took the bread away. Again, another miraculous, saving of his life by divine intervention. And it was also during this time that he started to become known for a lot of miracles that he was starting to perform. People would come to him, with all kinds of different, wishes and desires, and he'd be able to kind of have these, miracles kind of happen around him that made people just very interested in him and just really showed kind of his sanctity and his closeness to God. Despite the fact that his experiences with the monastic life hadn't been too great, he still had a great love for the communal life, and he felt really called to that. So he decided to start his own community. And he founded several monasteries actually during this time near the town of Subiaco in Italy. And it was the monastery at Monte Cassino, which he started construction of around 530, that kind of ended up being, his primary monastery, primary residence. This was the place that the rule of Saint Benedict, which is kind of the rule of which many monastic orders since have kind of based their own spirituality off of. This rule was kind of formed by Saint Benedict for the monks who lived in this monastery that he built. So he lived in this monastery again for the rest of his life. In solitude with his religious brothers. He died on the 21st of March in the year 547. This was a couple of years after his sister, Saint Scholastica, who herself had also, kind of founded monasteries for women in the Benedictine tradition. After, she had died in 543, Saint Benedict died in 547, several years later. So he was named Patron Protector of Europe by Pope St. Paul VI in 1964. And in the year 1980, Pope St. John Paul II named him co-patron of Europe along with Saints Cyril and Methodius. And his feast day is on July the 11th. That's actually all that we have for today. So thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you all have a very blessed week.